When Sarah found what looked like a starving stray cat on her porch, she thought she was saving an abandoned pet. The friendly creature rubbed against her legs, purring for attention, and ate from her hands like any house cat would. But when wildlife expert Annette King arrived, she realized this wasn't a stray cat at all. It was a young bobcat, and its trusting behavior meant only one thing. Someone had illegally raised this wild predator as a pet, destroying every survival instinct. If the bobcat couldn't be fully rehabilitated for release within 6 months, it would have to be euthanized. Annette faced an impossible choice. Could she teach a domesticated bobcat to be wild again? Or would this beautiful creature pay the ultimate price for human mistakes? Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The sun rose over northeastern Oklahoma like a slow, golden promise, spilling its light across the 140 acres of rolling hills and dense woodlands that made up Wild Heart Ranch. For Annette King, the morning was a sacred ritual. With a steaming mug of coffee in her hand, its warmth seeping into fingers weathered by decades of mending broken wings and calming frightened hearts, she would stand on her porch and listen. She listened for the low coo of a morning dove, the rustle of a deer in the underbrush, the distant, happy yips of the coyote packs that knew the boundaries of her sanctuary. This land was more than a place. It was a testament to a life lived in service to the silent, the wild, and the misunderstood. The ranch phone, a sturdy landline that had weathered more than one tornado warning, shattered the morning's peace with its shrill ring. Annette sighed, setting her mug down. A call this early usually meant trouble. Wild Heart Ranch. This is Annette. The voice on the other end was hesitant, a young woman's. Hi, my name is Sarah. I live over in the Clear Creek subdivision. I'm not sure who else to call. There's a cat here, a stray, and it's acting strange. Annette's mind immediately cycled through the usual possibilities. A domestic cat hit by a car, a litter of kittens abandoned in a drain pipe, a feral tomcat with a nasty abscess. Strange how, Sarah? Well, it's starving. I mean, ribs showing, fur all matted. It came right up to my porch this morning when I was getting the paper. My little boy, Tommy, he thought it was our neighbor's cat, Mittens, at first. But it's not. It's got these tufts on its ears, and its face is different. But it's so friendly. It's letting my husband pet it right now. It just keeps rubbing against his legs and meowing. We gave it a bowl of tuna, and it ate like it hadn't seen food in a month. A cold knot formed in Annette's stomach. Tufts on its ears, you said? A short, stubby tail? Maybe some spots on its coat? There was a pause. Yes, that's it exactly. How did you know? The knot tightened into a fist of dread. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Get your husband and your son inside the house right now. Do not try to touch the animal again. This isn't a stray cat. From your description, I'm almost certain you have a bobcat kitten on your porch. A gasp, then a muffled exchange on the other end. A bobcat? But it's so tame. It's acting just like a hungry house cat. I understand, and that's what makes this so dangerous and so tragic, Annette said, her voice calm but firm, honed by years of delivering difficult news. It's been habituated to people. Can you send me a picture on my cell? And please, keep everyone away from it until I can get there. The photo that buzzed onto her phone seconds later confirmed her worst fears. There, sitting on a welcome mat emblazoned with a cheerful sunflower, was a young bobcat. It was painfully thin, its oversized paws looking clumsy and out of proportion with its gaunt frame. But it was the look in its amber eyes that struck Annette to her core. It wasn't the wild, cautious, assessing gaze of a predator. It was a look of hopeful, trusting dependence. It was the look of a pet. "Oh, you poor, foolish thing," she whispered to the image on her screen. "What have they done to you?" By the time Annette and her young assistant Ben arrived at the suburban cul-de-sac, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, and a few stood on their lawns, pointing and murmuring. Sarah and her husband stood by their garage, their faces pale with a mixture of fear and awe. The bobcat, now named Rusty by the neighborhood kids for his slightly reddish coat, was curled up asleep on a discarded patio cushion, exhausted from his meal and the unexpected attention. There was no need for a tranquilizer dart or a catch pole. As Annette approached slowly, speaking in a low, soothing tone, the bobcat lifted its head, blinked, and let out a sound that was half meow, half chirp. When she knelt, it uncurled itself, stretched, and ambled over, rubbing the side of its face against her outstretched, leather-gloved hand. It purred, a deep, rattling sound that vibrated through her bones. It was the sound of a creature that associated the human hand not with danger, but with comfort, food, and affection. This was far worse than a simple rescue. This was an unraveling. Back at the ranch, the full scope of the tragedy became clear. In the quiet of the intake clinic, Annette gave the young bobcat a thorough examination. He was dehydrated and malnourished, but otherwise physically healthy. The real damage was invisible. He showed no fear of the enclosure, immediately investigating the water bowl and looking back at Annette as if expecting a toy to be thrown. He ignored the raw chicken wing she offered him, sniffing it with disinterest before nudging her hand, looking for petting. Someone hadn't just fed this animal, they had raised it. They had kept it indoors, cuddled it on a sofa, and treated it like a common tabby. In doing so, they had systematically dismantled every instinct nature had hardwired into him for survival. They had stolen his wildness. The call to the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation was one Annette dreaded making. Officer Miller was a good man, but he was a man of rules, and the rules in this case were brutal and unambiguous. "Annette, you know the law." Miller's weary voice came over the phone. "Habituated wildlife, especially a predator species, can't be released. It's a danger to the public and to itself. You have 6 months. If you can't fully rehabilitate it for release within that time frame, the state requires euthanasia. No exceptions." "But Dave, he's just a kitten," Annette pleaded, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "He's a victim here. Someone played with him like a toy and then dumped him when he got too big or too rambunctious. We can't punish him for that." "My hands are tied," Miller said, and she could hear the genuine regret in his voice. "It's a bad situation all around. Keeping him is illegal without a non-releasable exhibition permit, and you know how hard those are to get. Do your best, Annette. That's all I can tell you." Annette hung up the phone, the word euthanasia echoing in the silent room. She looked through the one-way glass at the bobcat, who was now batting playfully at a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam. He was a perfect, healthy, beautiful animal, condemned by an act of misplaced human affection. The thought of ending his life because he was too friendly, too trusting, was an obscenity that went against everything Wild Heart Ranch stood for. For days, Annette agonized. She and Ben tried everything to coax a flicker of wildness from Rusty. They used puppets that looked like prey, hiding them in his enclosure. He'd pounce on them playfully, but without the deadly focus of a hunter. They introduced the scent of other predators. He barely reacted. When Ben entered the enclosure to clean, Rusty would trot over and weave between his legs, desperate for contact. He was a ghost, a wild body inhabited by the spirit of a house cat. He was lost between two worlds, belonging to neither. One evening, unable to sleep, Annette walked to the far end of the property where the other bobcat rescues were housed. In a large, naturalistic enclosure, surrounded by tall chain-link fencing that angled inward at the top, lived 3 orphans of a similar age to Rusty. Their mother had been killed on a highway. Unlike Rusty, they had arrived at the ranch as spitting, terrified balls of fury. They wanted nothing to do with humans. They spent their days practicing the deadly arts of their kind, stalking each other through the tall grass, pouncing from low-hanging branches, and tearing into the deer carcasses the staff provided with a ferocity that was both beautiful and terrifying. Watching them, a desperate, unorthodox idea began to form in Annette's mind. A wild idea for a wild heart. It was a long shot, a gamble against a ticking clock and the deeply ingrained patterns of a domesticated mind, but it was the only chance he had. Wildness can be taught, she murmured to the twilight. Or maybe it can be caught. Like a fever. The next day, she explained the plan to Ben, who looked at her with wide, skeptical eyes. "You're going to put him in there? With them? Annette, they'll tear him apart. He doesn't speak their language. He doesn't know the rules." "He has to learn," Annette said, her jaw set with a grim determination. "We've tried to teach him, and it's failed. We're his captors, his providers. He sees us, and he remembers a life of comfort. He needs to learn from his own kind. He needs to forget us." The introduction was harrowing. After a week of letting them get used to each other's scent through a separating fence, the day came. Annette and Ben opened the connecting gate and retreated to watch from the observation blind. Rusty, seeing the new, expansive space, trotted eagerly into the main enclosure. He saw the other bobcats and, in his simple, pet-conditioned mind, they were potential playmates. He approached them with a curious, friendly chirp. The response was immediate and violent. The largest of the orphans, a young male, flattened his ears, let out a guttural hiss that sounded like escaping steam, and swiped at Rusty with a clawed paw. Rusty recoiled, a thin line of blood welling on his nose, his face a mask of shocked confusion. He let out a plaintive cry and ran, not to fight back, but to the part of the fence where the humans usually appeared, pacing back and forth and calling for the comfort he had always known. For 2 weeks, it was the same heart-wrenching story. Rusty was an outcast. The wild trio tolerated his presence, but made it clear he was not one of them. They ate first, claimed the best hiding spots, and communicated in a silent, subtle language of ear twitches and tail flicks that he simply didn't understand. He grew thinner, more withdrawn. He spent most of his time huddled in a corner, watching them with a look of profound loneliness. Annette's heart broke every time she watched the footage from the enclosure cameras. Ben began to gently suggest it was time to give up, to accept the inevitable. "No," Annette insisted, though her own faith was wavering. "Not yet. Watch the female. Watch Willow." Willow was the smallest of the wild 3, but the quickest and most cunning. She was a master of stealth, a patient and lethal hunter of the rabbits and quail they released into the enclosure for enrichment and training. While the males would often engage in loud, boisterous tussles, Willow was all quiet efficiency. and she had started watching Rusty. She wasn't aggressive towards him, merely observant, her intelligent eyes tracking his pathetic, clumsy movements. Then came the breakthrough. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible. A live mouse was released into the enclosure. The two males were on the other side, squabbling over a scrap of meat. Willow immediately dropped into a low crouch, her body taut as a bowstring. A few yards away, Rusty watched her. He had seen mice before in his previous life, but they were likely toys. This one was different. He watched Willow, and as her muscles tensed, he too lowered his body to the ground. It was a clumsy, awkward imitation, but it was the first time he had mirrored a truly wild behavior. Willow pounced, a blur of spotted fur, and the mouse was gone. Rusty stood up, looking from the spot where the mouse had been to Willow, who was now cleaning her whiskers. A connection had been made. A dormant wire had sparked to life deep within his brain. From that day forward, Rusty became Willow's shadow. He followed her at a distance, mimicking her every move. When she stalked through the grass, he stalked behind her. When she scaled a fallen log to survey her territory, he would clumsily try to climb it after her. He learned by watching. He learned that the rustle of leaves could mean prey. He learned that the shadow of a hawk overhead meant he should freeze and blend in with the ground. He learned that the keepers were not a source of affection, but a sign of danger that sent the others scurrying for cover. Slowly, painstakingly, the mask of the pet began to crack. His plaintive meows were replaced by cautious silence, then by the occasional low growl. When Ben entered the enclosure, Rusty no longer ran to his feet. Instead, he would melt into the tall grass, just like Willow, his spotted coat providing the camouflage it was always meant for. The cameras Annette had mounted captured the transformation frame by frame. They saw him make his first kill, a grasshopper, pouncing with an awkward but undeniable predatory instinct. Weeks later, he successfully stalked and caught a quail, a look of fierce, wild pride in his eyes as he carried it away. He was still smaller and less confident than the others, but he was no longer an outcast. He was learning the dance. He would engage in tentative playfights with the other male, hisses and snarls replacing the confused whimpers of his first weeks. He was becoming a bobcat. The 6-month deadline loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. Officer Miller called for an update. "He's making progress, Dave," Annette said, trying to keep the desperate hope from her voice. "Real progress. He's hunting on his own. He's avoiding human contact. He's learning." "Learning isn't enough, Annette. He has to be wild, genuinely wild. The final decision will be based on my assessment." The day of the assessment arrived, a cool, overcast morning. Officer Miller stood beside Annette in the observation blind, binoculars in hand, his face impassive. Ben, on cue, entered the enclosure from the far side, carrying the daily food bucket. The two wild males and Willow immediately vanished into the dense brush. Rusty hesitated for a split second. His eyes flicked towards the familiar human figure, and for a heart-stopping moment, Annette thought she saw the old flicker of dependence. She held her breath. Then he turned and melted into the shadows after the others, not a single sound marking his passage. Miller was silent for a long time, scanning the empty-looking enclosure. "All right, Annette," he finally said, lowering his binoculars. "He passes the avoidance test. He's got a chance. Find a good release spot. You're cleared." Tears of relief streamed down Annette's face. She grabbed Miller in a fierce, surprising hug. "Thank you, Dave. Thank you." They chose a vast, protected state forest miles from the nearest road or human dwelling. The journey there was quiet, the only sound the soft rustle from the transport crate in the back of the truck. Annette drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. This was the goal, the victory she had fought so hard for. But it felt like a goodbye. She was returning him to a world of danger and uncertainty. A world where he would have to fight for every meal and face every threat alone. At the release site, a clearing surrounded by ancient oaks and hickories, she and Ben carried the crate to the edge of the woods. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the scent of home. Annette knelt and unlatched the door. "You're free, Rusty," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Go be who you were born to be." The door swung open. For a long moment, the Bobcat didn't move. Then, he slowly padded out, his paws making no sound on the forest floor. He was no longer the scrawny, scruffy creature that had begged for tuna on a suburban porch. His coat was thick and healthy, his muscles lean and defined under his skin. He was magnificent. He took a few steps, then paused, turning his head. He looked back, his amber eyes locking not with Annette, but with the empty crate. A vessel that held the lingering scent of his own kind, of the companions who had taught him how to survive, of Willow. It was a final, silent acknowledgement of the world he was leaving and the one he was embracing. Then, with a twitch of his tufted ears, he turned and vanished into the dense green tapestry of the forest. One moment he was there, a perfect picture of wild grace, and the next, he was gone, reclaimed by the world that had nearly lost him forever. Annette stood for a long time, staring into the woods where he had disappeared, the silence he left behind ringing in her ears. It was a heart-wrenching success, the hardest kind of victory. She had saved his life only to send him away forever. Months later, a fellow rehabber working on a research project in that same state forest sent Annette an email. Attached was a photo from a trail camera, triggered in the dead of night. It showed a healthy, mature bobcat, its spotted coat gleaming under the infrared light. It was crouched over a kill, its eyes glowing in the darkness. There was no way to be certain, of course, but the faint, thin scar on its nose was unmistakable. Annette printed the picture and pinned it to the corkboard in her office, among the photos of countless other successes and failures. She looked at the image of the fierce, independent predator thriving in the wild, and she smiled. The emptiness she had felt at his release was filled with a profound, heartwarming peace. They hadn't just saved one animal. They had proven that the heart of the wild is a stubborn, resilient thing, and that even when it is buried, broken, or stolen, with a little faith and the help of its own kind, it can always find its way back home.